It is a hot and steamy day in East Rutherford, New Jersey at the Quest Diagnostics Training Center for another day of Giants practice. I am John Schmeelk, joined by Paul Dottino. Welcome to Giants Training Camp Report, presented by Citizens. It should be a fun day of practice today as the New York Football Giants get ready for their first preseason game on Thursday night. Paul, it'll be fun to watch the guys out there on the field on a very hot day, which has been a series of other hot days here in August.
Well, you know, John, coming up on Wednesday, it'll actually be 2 full weeks of training camp, but this is only the back end of the first back-to-back fully padded practices that the Giants have had. As Coach Dable says, the conditioning period is already over. This is the time now where they've really got to get cranking on their plays and find out what their player evaluations are. It is time to get serious, folks. Thursday, there's a preseason game in Foxborough against the Patriots.
Yeah, we see some drills here, Paul. They're working on some of their blocking here on the sled. You see the Giants group of defensive backs, a group that's going to be very important this year, given how Wink Martindale wants to run his defense. They'll be asked to play a lot of man-to-man coverage, so this will be a big focus as they try to evaluate this group in the coming days.
Well, John, Wink was talking to us earlier today during the media briefing and said he's very pleased with how the starters are coming along. Now, for those of you who have not followed camp to this point, Aaron Robinson and Adoree Jackson have been the starting corners, and we know that Julian Love and Xavier McKinney are the two starting safeties, with Darnay Holmes running as the first-team nickel. Now, that was to be expected coming in, but to this point, none of these guys has done anything that shows any slippage, as if one of the guys on the back of the depth chart could potentially steal a spot. What Wink actually said to us is, we want to work on that back end. We want to work on that depth chart and make sure we enhance those guys' skills, because the guys up front are really doing a nice job. And Darnay Holmes in particular has had more splash plays than anybody in the secondary during this month of camp.
Yeah, Wink Martindale had very positive things to say about Darnay Holmes today. Said his nickname is Dirty 30 because he loves to do all the dirty work. He's a very tough player, and that's a position you need a player like that, Paul. He plays inside in that slot position where you not only have to cover, you also have to play against the run. And the other thing Wink Martindale said, he always wants to cover the best wide receivers in one-on-one drills. So that's the type of attitude you want out of your cornerbacks.
Darnay Holmes played 37% of the defensive snaps last season as he continues to progress as a young, maturing player. I think that's the thing that we have to keep in mind. Last year, he had some consistencies, but a young guy who really was thrown heavily into the mix. And as he comes back this year, he now shows the poise and the experience of a veteran. He's been physical. I believe he's been a part of 4 turnovers in the first 2 weeks of training camp, John. And when I talk about splash plays, those are the kind of big plays that this defense wants to see.
Yeah, he started training camp, Paul, with 3 interceptions and a forced fumble, just constantly getting his hands on the football. And those are the type of smart, instinctual players Wink Martindale really stresses and likes to have on his roster. This is not a simple defense, Paul. You need guys that can adjust on the fly within the scheme, communicate, so they get the most out of what Wink's trying to do.
Well, John, I think it's very important that both Joe Schoen and Brian Dable put a high priority on players with football acumen as they started to tinker with this roster. Remember, as the Giants practice today in training camp, they've only got approximately 35 players who have played a regular season game for the New York Giants prior to this summer. There's been a lot of turnover during the course of this offseason, and football acumen, once again, has been a top-notch priority. Smart players to deal with a complex scheme on both sides of the ball.
So you're watching the cornerback drills right now, and Paul, what they're doing here, they're showing how they're supposed to transition from man coverage, get their shoulders turned, and make plays on the football.
Right, and for those folks who have heard us talk about a jugs gun on occasion, that's what that apparatus is, with the 2 horizontal tires, firing footballs out at high speed, try to see if those DBs can get their hands on them and hopefully hold on to them for interceptions. You get a look right here at sometimes it can be very difficult because you're only talking about a few yards away from that machine, and it's firing it basically at John Elway velocity. Remember how he used to actually embed the treads of the football onto his players' hands because he would throw it so hard?
Yeah, Paul, the old cliche is, right, guys become defensive backs because they're not wide receivers. So this is a way for these guys to work on their hands. And the player we're seeing right now is Adoree Jackson. He really is the Giants' most veteran cornerback. He doesn't have a history of a lot of interceptions, but he's made a couple really nice plays on the ball during camp here. He had 2 picks in the same practice a couple practices ago, and he's shown the mettle to have the skill and the ability to be the Giants' #1 corner this year and match up every week with the opposing #1 wide receiver.
Adoree Jackson has had a very strong training camp. You're right, John, shadowing skills. I quoted these numbers, I guess, a couple of weeks ago when I was talking to somebody about camp. Last year, Jackson only allowed 9 yards per catch and only a 52% completion mark on passes targeted at him in coverage. Both of those marks were career bests since he came over from Tennessee and played with the Giants last year in his first season with Big Blue. This is a guy who is ready to step up for the challenge to be a cornerback 1.
We've been talking a lot about the Giants' defense and offense here. Here you're seeing one-on-one drills start here, Paul, and we're seeing the left side of the offensive line get some work.
Yeah, now, why is this important? Well, because you want to see how guys respond to trying to shed and how they respond with a secondary move. It's all about what you do to counter the offensive lineman. So now here we see a move up the middle now.
Justin Ellis.
Yep. What you want to see is the counter. Every time you see the 2 linemen lock up, you want to look at the hand fighting that the defensive player will do as he tries to get the offensive player's hands off of him. In some instances, they'll just try to tug. In other times, they'll try to push them off. Other times, they'll actually give them chops and try to chop the guy's hands off as they make their counter to try to get to the quarterback. There's O'Shane Ximenez going off the edge. That time, he didn't have to use a counter move. He was able to use his speed.
We've seen him show some really nice speed rushes over the course of camp, Paul, winning against those right tackles.
Ximenez has flashed much more this summer than he had in the past. I do think this scheme is much more friendly to him. He seems to have really adopted to what Wink Martindale wants to do. In fact, quite frankly, I think all of the edge rushers are very excited to operate in Wink's scheme.
Now inside, we have Josh Rivas, the offensive lineman, operating on the inside, showing some good protection skills, Paul. And again, these one-on-one drills, this is what Wink Martindale's system is supposed to design, right? These one-on-one opportunities for the Giants defensive linemen to try to win because you're bringing so many rushers.
See, now, I was talking to Carl Banks about this the other day. I said to him, well, if you're one of the coaches, are you looking more at the technique here or are you looking more at the effort? And Carl said, look, you just want to win every play. And that's the key. It doesn't necessarily have to be pretty as long as you hustle and fight and win your snap. Now, at the same time, the coaches do want to see some sort of technique because anything that they get sloppy on, they will be coached up, these players. And now we're going back to the defensive backs. And there you see Aaron Robinson. What did I tell you about blanket coverage on Colin Johnson? Just all over the receiver. Robinson is as sticky as they come, and I'm not talking about the humidity.
Very good contested catch by Johnson in that play, by the way. He managed to hold on to that ball on that slant. Now again, this time in coverage, Andrew Adams, a recent addition in training camp, going against the tight end, Austin Allen, across the middle. Now we have the wide receivers outside here. That's Robert Foster. He was in a red jersey last practice, winning over the top, ball a little bit overthrown, but nice speed on the outside there, getting behind the defender.
Going against Cordell Flott. And Flott's a very interesting guy because a lot of people thought when he got here to training camp, you know, he would be in competition at the slot. But Darnay Holmes has done so well, John. I don't necessarily know how that would be a competition because I think Holmes is really on his way to locking that down. So I think it's really good for Flott to see a variety of snaps at different positions to give him a better chance to try to compete for some reps.
That's Marcus Kemp catching that on Michael Jacquette. He slipped, got back onto his feet. Good concentration to make that catch there.
Speaking of Darnay Holmes, there he is.
There he is, lining up. Look like he's going to line up on this particular rep against Richie James, a free agent addition this offseason, coming over from the 49ers.
James has had a really good camp, too.
And you
makes
see
a nice move.
Yeah.
And he got free.
That's one of those whip routes, Paul. You go inside, come back out, creating some space against Holmes. Now working outside, that's what we want to see. The number one's Kenny Golladay working on Adoree Jackson for the in-cut and the catch.
They got their feet tied up just a little bit, and we saw some stumbling, but of course Golladay was able to come down with it because you just love Galladay's ability to fight through things to be able to finish off a play. Here's Das. Made a couple of nice plays the other day, and people are really excited to see him. He's got some size and some length and some speed.
And in coverage there, Darren Evans, Paul, he's one of the guys that made some plays. He made some plays in practice late last week. He had a couple of plays at the scrimmage on Friday night as well. You talked about how Wink Martindale is trying to figure out the depth at the defensive back position. He's one of those guys that's been with the twos that has made a mark a little bit.
Yeah, it's really hard for these guys right now because they're still trying to make their way. Let's face it, even a guy like Evans, who's been in this league before, he's not a rookie, but he's still new to this system, and he's new to the surroundings, and so it does take some time to acclimate yourselves. I do think one of the things that we're going to want to see in this preseason game against the Patriots on Thursday is specifically how do they do in game situations. Again, it's one thing to be here, but the tempo is going to pick up to a whole nother level in Foxborough.
And Wink Martindale and Brian Dable did say that everyone's going to play on Thursday night.
Yes.
Some players will play a different amount of snaps. Some will play more. Some will play less, depending on where they are in terms of, understanding of the system, how many years they've been in the league. But we're going to see all the Giant players play on Thursday night.
The only thing that Dable did hint at is that some will play more than others. Again, understanding in terms of age, experience, familiarity with what they're trying to do.
Health.
And obviously health, too. That's always going to be a top priority. But I do like what Dable said even earlier in the week when he mentioned you can't take out insurance on every player. He knows you've got to play. Game reps are the most important, critical thing that these guys will have during the course of the next few weeks as they prepare for the regular season. In this system, all of the wide receivers as well as the quarterbacks need to know everybody else's plays and what all of their options are because there is so much flexibility in this playbook. You can imagine how it might look if the quarterback sees one thing, the wide receiver doesn't necessarily get it. He runs a flexible route to the left and the pass goes to the right. That's why it's imperative for these guys to be on the same page. For example, just yesterday, we saw the Giants quarterbacks and receivers on their own, running their own routes and pass plays to get that extra chemistry built into what's going on.
Yeah, Mike Kafka spoke today. He talked about how in the last 7 to 10 days, that communication and coordination between the receivers and quarterbacks has really come into play. There's Daniel Jones on a play-action pass looking downfield. He had a receiver, Richie James, running open that time. Nice throw, just a little bit overthrown.
Guarded by Darnay Holmes, as we mentioned, a guy who's going to be taking care of a lot of shifty guys like James will be. We're in the portion of team drills here where we're going to see some 11-on-11 stuff. This is always the most exciting part of practice every day because it's the most that it looks like real football.
Yeah, and you see the Giants starting offensive line there. You got Andrew Thomas at left tackle, Shane Lemieux, John Feliciano back at center. Then the veteran Mark Lewinsky at right guard, Evan Neal at right tackle. Saquon Barkley, play action to him. And Jones showing those legs, Paul. We've seen they are not unwilling to use him as a runner here during training camp practices.
Well, Daniel Jones has that extra part of his game, that mobility part that so many people want to see, and I get that. And I think the Giants are going to be very diligent in terms of how they coach that. I do think one of the things that's very interesting for me is that Wink Martindale throws such a wide variety of schemes at his offenses here during practice. By the time the Giants get to the regular season, they will have probably seen all the exotic kinds of looks that they may see during this campaign. I love the other day talking to Kafka, and people asked him about Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney. He goes, look, these guys have very specific skill sets. They're unique. They can get out in space. They can make people miss. The Giants front office and the coaching staff have spent many of hours making sure that they know ways to get these guys in the best position possible so that they can make big plays, yards after the catch, John. That's what it's all about for those guys.
And Paul Daniels, someone he's really come on in the last, week to 10 days. He's thrown some nice balls, really some good deep balls as well during one-on-one drills. We've seen his connection with Kenny Golladay, I think, really grow over this past week. You've seen Golladay have maybe two of his best practices as a Giant in the past week.
I would agree with that, John, and I think a great deal has to do with what Golladay did during this offseason. He did not go home very much. He pretty much stayed here in New Jersey and was with Daniel Jones working out the entire offseason, again, trying to enhance that communication between the quarterback and the wide receiver. So they were constantly throwing offseason passes amongst the two of them as the months progressed as we got into training camp. Incredibly important. So now I think him and Jones are much more on the same page than they may have even been last year. Tate Crowder with a nice pass breakup over the middle. And by the way, we should mention, Wink Martindale said as far as the interior linebackers go, outside of Blake Martinez, that competition is wide open.
The one thing we've seen is a lot of misdirection from this Giants offense. They're going to try to create some nice easy completions and easy yards by trying to get defensive players to have their eyes moving in the wrong direction before they go to their intended target.
I think the one thing that I'd like to add about this running game, as we've seen it over the last couple of weeks, is that no matter who it is running the ball, I've seen a lot of effort, a lot of speed, a lot of assertiveness. See, coming right up through the line. I mean, look at the way that Antonio Williams lowered his shoulder. He understands, look, they're not trying to knock guys over and put guys on the ground, but they want to make sure, all these backs, that they're running assertively. And that's what we've seen. Yesterday, Saquon Barkley had quite a bit of action inside the deep red zone, and he was running quick, hard, and fast.
Yeah, and decisively as well. That time, Gavin Heslop knocking the pass into the air, but Colin Johnson comes down with it. And Colin Johnson, Paul, is somebody that I think has really had a nice training camp. He's worked his way into some reps with the ones. Right now he's with the twos. But he's really the only other guy besides Kenny Golladay that has that elite size where even if he's not wide open, you can throw him the ball because he can make those contested catches.
Colin Johnson appeared in about a dozen games for the Giants last year, caught a little over 100 yards worth of passes. I think it was 11 catches. Certainly in his cameos, he piqued some interest, and that's one of the reasons why the Giants brought him back to training camp here once again.
Tyrod Taylor working off a sheet there as they're getting ready. And, Paul, you wonder when they might start incorporating some of those carded practices to get ready for the Patriots here on Thursday night. As preseason games comes, the carded practices begins where they start running the plays that their opponents might run. Usually that doesn't happen, though, until their second and third preseason games. You get a little further into the preseason.
Right at this point, the Giants coaching staff is still concentrating on evaluating their own guys.
Yep.
Trying to figure out what their guys can do, figuring out what their guys want to do and like to do, and what they don't really like very much to do. That's what this is all about during this week and even going into next week. And a really nice catch by Darius Slayton down the left sideline. And Slayton needs to make some more of those. He knows that if he's going to make his mark on this team this year with the kind of talent in that wide receiver room, he has to make more plays.
And you can see his confidence growing over the past couple of weeks, Paul. He's made some of those contested catches. That time to throw a little bit on his back shoulder. He had to turn, adjust in the air to make that play. Good concentration and a tough catch from Slayton, who, again, after you get through those top four wide receivers, you probably know who they're going to be. There's a lot of competition for the back end of that wide receiver room.
There is, and Slayton's been banged up the last couple of years. I'm sure he would tell you that he would like to have produced at a higher level, but this is his chance now after a healthy offseason as Davis Webb hits Doss on the left side for a nice gain. Davis Webb, another one of those guys who can help with the chemistry between the quarterback room and the wide receiver room. We know he came over from the Bills. Knows the system well. He's basically like a coach on the field. We've been talking about this now for a number of months. He is a tremendous asset to all of these offensive players.
Yeah, he's familiar with the system. Another coach in the room that's not actually a coach, and sometimes it's better to have a player that's under center and running the same plays that the other quarterbacks are, especially Daniel Jones, to try to help teach him what they're exactly looking for in every play in this system. Webb again under center. This time a handoff up the middle, defense firm up front. And that's one thing I think, Paul, that's been pretty consistent. This defensive front, that time it was Deshaun Corbin that got stuffed. This defensive front has done a really nice job with their run defense. When they've done those 9 and 7 drills, when they've done those goal-to-goal drills, they have not given a lot of ground up front.
No, and in fact, yesterday was a really good opportunity for them because the primary focus of yesterday's practice was running between the tackles and running in the deep red zone. And those guys, let's just say they had a lot of fun because they were clogging things up pretty good. I think someone was going to have to call a plumber to unclog those lanes.
Well, when you have Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams in there, it gets really tough. quick pass to the right that time. It looks like it is complete near the first down marker, finding Marcus Kemp there. Well, that's the end of our coverage of Giants training camp today from the Quest Diagnostics Training Center in East Rutherford, New Jersey. For Paul Dottino, I am John Schmeelk. Thank you so much for being with us. The Giants continue their preparation for their first preseason game against the Patriots on Thursday night. Stay tuned to Giants.com, the Giants YouTube channel, and of course, all of their social media platforms for continuing coverage of training camp. We'll see you next time.